Kanada talar Danmark.
Guten Abend, hier spricht Kanada.
Qui Radio-Canada.
Ici Radio-Canada.
Transmite Radio-Canada.
Ik Canada Radio.
Goedenavond luisteraars, hier is Radio-Canada.
Kanada volá Československo.
To Movie Canada.
Those voices are thrust across the Atlantic every day of the week from these powerful transmitters at Sackville, New Brunswick. English, French, German, Dutch, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, Czech, Slovak, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, and Hungarian are the languages of the international service of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Why should Canada be broadcasting to these people? This is what tonight's scan intends to find out. Scan is the program that shows you the why, who, and how of CBC Broadcasting. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Frank Stawley. We've brought the head man of the International Service, IS, as it is called within the corporation, from his office in Montreal, to visit with us tonight on Scan. His name is Charles Delafield. Mr. Delafield, first of all, just for our viewers' sake, what is the International Service?
Well, the CBC International Service is a means of projecting Canada to people in various parts of the world right in their own homes, in a lively and graphic fashion. We do this in various ways, by direct shortwave transmissions, by a variety of transcriptions which are shipped to overseas broadcasting stations for them to play over their own facilities direct to their listeners, and we also do quite a bit of specialized coverage of international events taking place in Canada. Now, how did this all begin? It began some years ago, in 1945 to be exact. Naturally, the first thing was to find a suitable site for shortwave transmissions from Canada. And the site was chosen at Sackville, New Brunswick, by the sea, and the broadcasts were to be directed, of course, to Europe and Latin America and Australia and New Zealand. The erection of the antenna arrays was quite a complicated job, and the arrays were designed, of course, to reach various parts of the world. As the service started, it was the end of the war, and we began, first of all, sending broadcasts over to Europe to Canadian servicemen to help maintain their morale with programs from Canada. And then, taking an active part in the prosecution of the war, we were doing prisoner of war messages from Canada to the German homeland as a means of trying to break down the morale of the people there. Following this, as the war ended, servicemen came home. They soon began going off to other parts of the world, such as Korea, and we therefore began covering the events of activities there. Following this, as the various Western allies began to develop their air services, we did a lot of coverage of NATO air training crews in Canada from various West European countries. We expanded into the field of domestic concerns such as immigration, where we did a number of interviews with various immigrants to Canada, particularly, of course, from England, France, and Western Europe generally. And the service gradually expanded. We began broadcasting to Iron Curtain countries, and the latest of our transmissions in this direction, of course, is the Hungarian service, which was established following the Hungarian revolt. And we naturally picked up many activities of the early arrivals of Hungarian immigrants to Canada. So you see, it's quite a comprehensive service.
Well, what proof do you have that anyone is listening?
Well, that's a natural question. It's certainly important to us to know that people are listening. We receive about 25,000 letters a year from people in various parts of the world listening to our service, telling us what they think of it, and asking for further information about Canada. We also maintain paid observers in various parts of the world to give us day-by-day reports on how our signals are being received in those areas. And from the Iron Curtain countries, of course, we don't get a great deal of mail. It's practically, I should say, non-existent. Last year, we got a few letters from Poland, and these did certainly give us an idea of how firmly established our Polish service is. Only the other day, as a matter of fact, speaking about Iron Curtain mail, I received a letter from a listener who is now living in Western Germany. He had recently escaped from the Russian zone. He says that there are many listeners in the area where he was, and it's going to take him a little while to buy a shortwave set because he had to leave his present one behind, of course. He says, very interestingly, that he used to make tape recordings of our broadcasts and play them to his friends who had no sets. He ends by saying, "Perhaps you can imagine what it means to me to write without risking anything. Don't forget to think of the listeners in the Eastern Zone when you are broadcasting in German. A personal word for them is worth more than an editorial in any paper."
It's very interesting. Now, this map of the world we have here, I believe you can use it to show how far the IS signals reach.
Yes, that is true. This map is designed to show the center of the map actually is located at Sackville, New Brunswick. It's designed to show how the beams go out from Sackville to various parts. First to Europe, and then we have another beam directed to Africa, and then another beam direction is to South America, another beam direction to Central America, and then on, of course, to New Zealand and Australia. These beams are changed in direction electronically, and then, of course, we use different antenna arrays to reach different parts of the world.
Would you say that IS exists to disseminate propaganda or entertainment, or perhaps both?
Well, Frank, I would say that I wouldn't quite put the question that way. I'd be inclined to say that we do both. We try to make our program certainly as entertaining as possible. It's very necessary for us to keep our listeners listening, to develop more and more listeners. Propaganda, no. We conceive that a Canadian service such as this is designed to present news, factual news, without any slanting, news as you hear it over your domestic services, prepared under the same standards, and comment on the day's events and a general projection of this country.
Well, tying in with that, are you given an official CBC or government line to follow in preparing news and commentary?
Well, particularly in our East European broadcasting, we naturally keep in very close touch with external affairs for day-to-day guidance. We receive lots of information, and therefore we are able to shape our broadcasts with some care, as we must, to that area of the world. But, of course, we summarize not only the government position on international issues, we provide a wide coverage to our listeners of Canadian editorial opinion. And this is quite important to reflect the fullness of the Canadian viewpoint right across the country.
From time to time, we hear a good deal about this business of jamming the signals. Do the communist countries try to block out your programs?
Yes, we suffer the same fate as the Voice of America and the BBC. Jamming is certainly a very major occupation of the Soviet and satellite areas, and it has been estimated, actually, that they must maintain over 1,000 shortwave jamming transmitters to stop the signals coming in, and this represents an expenditure, presumably, of over $100 million. So it's a very extensive operation. But of course, jamming isn't necessarily as effective in all areas of the country. It's best effective, I suppose, in terms of large urban areas with a dense population, but is not as effective in other parts.
Their transmitters to jam are strategically placed to cover the densely populated areas.
That is quite correct. And of course, our facilities are fairly limited, but we feel we must go on broadcasting to this area because we are presenting a particularly Canadian point of view.
Could you give us a sample of, say, a day's programming for Behind the Iron Curtain? For example, today's programming.
I would suggest that each broadcast, and the maximum is 30 minutes in any one language, would consist, first of all, of news, national and international news, followed by a commentary on a particularly significant item in the day's news, and that would then be succeeded by various topical interviews or comment. For instance, in the Russian service, a review of Pasternak's book, Dr. Zhivago. And then we would round off the broadcast with some descriptive piece on Canada.
And this goes on 7 days a week.
7 days a week.
Year in and year out.
That is correct.
A good deal of work and preparation. Well, there's one other question that comes to mind, and that is, how much does it cost the taxpayer to support this service?
Well, that certainly is a very pertinent question, and one which we naturally face each year since our annual budget is provided as a direct parliamentary vote. And we naturally have to explain our operations very closely. The amount of money spent on this service is $2 million a year, and a staff of 174 people, broadcasting in 16 languages, 3 other languages shipped program material shipped to the individual countries for broadcasting locally, and apart from this, an extensive transcription service, both in spoken word and in music.
Well, Mr. Delafield, we'd like to thank you very much for coming to SCAM today and explaining, at least in part, the operations of the international service. I'm sure we all wish you every success in your work, and we hope that soon these Russian transmitters will fall by the wayside and we get a clear signal through to the Iron Curtain countries.
Very happy to be here.
Thank you very kindly, sir.